Hello, and welcome to another Gramps tutorial. In this episode, we will look at the difference between repositories, sources, and citations, and see why we should use them in Gramps, as well as how to apply this to our own Gramps database. So first of all, let's talk about why we need to cite our sources. So if you're just using Gramps in order to create a graphic tree, you probably don't need to cite your sources, and it probably would be a waste of time for you. However, if you're like me and you're actually using Gramps to document and track all of my relatives and put all of the information that I find in there to create different relationships between the people, it's probably a good idea to cite our information. Now, at the very beginning, it's going to feel very time intensive to do this, but it will pay off in the future, and it does get easier. So, it's going to help increase your credibility. By using citations, you're providing proof when you're sharing your tree with others as far as the different claims that you're making and conclusions you're drawing. In this way, you can actually show why you've made those claims and why they are correct. And not only proving your credibility, but it's also going to help explain your claims to other people using your research long after you're gone. Either you're just not here, or your research may last well into years after you've come and gone. And this way, having those citations will allow other people to take the same steps that you took and able to see why you made the claims that you did. They also will help you and others quickly return to the original sources that you first got your data from, so that you can check facts in case you ever think that something's either not quite right, or maybe you have sources that don't quite agree with each other, and that way you can compare the two and try to draw a better conclusion. So Gramps divides our database citation ability in 3 different groups, and the top level is the repositories. Then we've got sources, and underneath we have citations. So what are these exactly? Well, a repository is a collection of sources. So the repository is the top level of our citation hierarchy here. And the repository is actually like a physical place that we go that holds sources. So it can be like a library, for example. There's many books and newspapers and microfilms, all that type of stuff. Now, it doesn't actually have to be a physical brick and mortar building. It can also be something online as well. So it could be an online database such as Family Search, Ancestry, and the many other places where you might go to get genealogical information. It can also be somebody's house. So maybe there's someone you know who has a lot of records or photos that you would like to use in your Gramps research. And this house could also be included in your repository as somewhere that you actually go to get information. So inside the repositories are going to be collections of sources. So what is a source? Well, a source is anything from which genealogical information can be derived. So like I said, books, newspapers, microfilms, census records, birth records, photos, interviews with people, anything that we can get information from to put in our tree. And so within our sources, we're going to want to pick out certain facts for different places in our tree. And each fact there will have some type of citation. So a citation is actually pointing directly into the source of where your information came from. So for example, if it's a book, you might have a page number. If it's a collection of microfilms, you might provide the film number. Whatever we need to include to get directly to the information that we're using. And so we have some things that we need to keep in mind here as far as what makes a good citation and what will make our citations the most effective in our family tree. So first of all, our citations over anything else should be there to provide evidence for us. So we want to be able to have something to back us up and make our claims a lot more credible. Now, our citations should also enable other researchers to easily find the information from the source that we used. And then it should also help them to see how you came to that conclusion. Now, as we make these citations, we don't want to make them too complex, but we want to make them precise enough that they're still going to help the person reading them to get to our source. So we want to make them as simple as possible. And one of the most important things, and I can't stress this enough, is record the citations as soon as you can. So if you are following along in this series of Gramps videos, the reason why I am putting this video before we even start putting facts into our tree is that it's so important that you get into the habit of doing your citations and then putting the facts in and citing it right away. Because if you put it off till later, you're going to get an ever-growing stack of citations that you need to fill in, and it just seems like busy paperwork, and you're not going to want to do it. So it's at least my advice that before you ever actually put anything into your tree that you're going to use a citation for, you'll want to include the citation into the tree first, and that way you can then start pulling out all the information. You won't forget where you placed it in the tree, so you can cite each individual fact, and we'll see how to do that in future videos. We also want to adopt a good style early on to avoid rework later. So that's another reason why this video is coming first over all the other stuff that we could be doing in our tree. And that's because we want to develop a very clear, concise, and consistent style in the way that we're doing our sources. Because if we do a few at the beginning, and then we can run a few reports or do whatever we want to do with our tree, and if we like the way that it's outputting our information, then we can stick with it and move forward. But if we're seeing that there's certain things that we don't quite like in the reports and how that it's showing us the citations, we can go back and fix them, but we don't want to have hundreds to fix because we're probably not going to go back and do that. But if we only have maybe 10 or so and we can find problems, it would be a lot easier to fix them now and then move forward with those new solutions in place. So we also want to provide citations for as much as our tree as we can. So we don't just want to provide citations for a few pieces of information here and there. What I like to do and what I would recommend, because Gramps makes this very easy, is that every single piece of information that you enter into your tree that you pulled out of some source, or that you're seeing again in multiple sources, that you attach that source to every piece of information, because that's going to make our research more credible. It's going to show that there's proof behind everything we do, and the more sources that we can show that also agree with what you have is going to make you more credible than you could be with just one source. Now we want to record our citations in a way that will be relevant for the future, and this comes more and more when we have things like websites, because the problem with just including a link to the website and nothing else is that websites change and the addresses change, and in the future the website may not even be there. And so it's really important not only to include the website link, but also to include more information about what collection you got this stuff from, where it was from, who was the author, that type of stuff. And one of the most important things is be consistent. Not everyone is going to cite everything in the same way. Some people may find some things a little bit more important than others, and that's okay. The important thing is that you're very consistent. Now, we do want to try to follow certain citation style guides if we can. However, there's various fields that are going to be in Gramps, and we'll be able to fill them out how we see fit. And sometimes we may include something that doesn't quite exactly fit the way it should, but it's providing more information for anyone who wants to in the future look up our sources. And you'll see what I mean in a little bit here. The last thing that I want to show you here before we move into Gramps is just a kind of a sample of what our database is going to look like once we start filling it out as far as our citations go. So we're going to have on the very top level a repository. So we had to go somewhere to get some information. Either we have it at our house, in which case our house would be the repository. Maybe we went to a library to get information. Maybe we just found it online. Wherever we got this information, that will be our repository. So for example, Family Search. in this video, I have an example that we'll be using, and I pulled it from Family Search. So therefore, our repository would be the Family Search website. Now, within our website or our repository, so it could be a library or something, we're going to have multiple sources. So just as like a library has many books that we could use in order to get information, whatever repository we have, we're probably going to have multiple sources within that repository. However, we don't always have to. It could just be one source, and that's okay. Now, with each source, we will be opening and going through and seeing what information is in that source, and we're going to have citations for each source. So what this means is that we may have multiple pages inside of a source that we'd be interested in. And depending on the facts and stuff, as long as we're consistent, we'll want to cite each individual page and maybe for each individual fact that we pull out. Now what I tend to do is if there's multiple facts on one page, I will just create one citation for that page. However, if we have, for example, maybe one page is one person and then another page is another person, I would create two citations in that case. Now, that's only one example. And of course, as our tree fills out, we're probably going to visit multiple places. So as you can see, as our tree gets more and more in depth, we're going to have more repositories. And within those repositories, we're going to have even more sources. And within those sources, we'll have the most citations. So you can see how this tree is growing. Now, there will be some cases where we may have a source that is in two different repositories, yet it's the same source, and possibly just in a different format. Well, Gramps will allow us to do that too. Now, we won't be looking at that specifically in this video, but we may be looking at it in a future video. But Gramps does have the capabilities to actually give a source multiple repositories. And all you would do is, under the reference editor, when we attach the source to the repository, we would just mark that the source in one repository, maybe it's a book, but in another repository, maybe it's an electronic copy. And we have the ability to do that. So what I want to do now is I want to look at a source that I pulled off of Family Search here. So if you've been following these videos, we've been adding Sarah Wallisa and her parents and grandparents to our family tree. So they are already in the tree, and that's all that's in the tree so far is just her parents, and her grandparents. And so now what I'd like to do is we would like to add this information about Sarah Wallisa, and it's about her birth and christening. And so we have a record here, and it's from St. John's Reformed Church in Pennsylvania. And in this video, we're just going to work on how to do the citation. In the next video, we will look at how to actually add these events and dates into our tree, and then how to cite it, since we'll have the citation already built. But it's my advice that before you ever start entering data from any source into your tree, you first create the citation. Because it's kind of like the stuff you don't want to do, so get it out of the way first, and then you can get to the fun stuff where you actually fill out the tree. And then with each fact that you put in, you can reference your source, and it will make things so much easier than trying to do it the other way where you put all the information in, then you create the source, and then you try to remember and go back and attach it to everything. So this is more of a logical process of steps that I'm trying to introduce to you based on the series in the videos. So as we see here, Family Search and Ancestry does this as well. They actually give us a proper citation. So we don't actually have to worry about if we want to write out a citation from scratch. Now, Gramps will give us various fields, and we're going to have to pick out some of this information so that it works better in Gramps for us. So let's pull up Gramps. And I'm already here in the source view, and this is where we would start to input our sources. Now, before I do that, I have not put anything together as far as repositories either. And obviously repositories we're not going to have to enter as often unless you're visiting many different places. But since a lot of my information comes from Family Search and Ancestry, I only have to put those in one time, and we can reuse them over and over for as long as we need to. So the first thing I'd like to do is let's create a new repository. So we're going to be in the repository view. We're going to click on the plus to add a new repository. And all it's asking here is a name. So I'm going to put familysearch.org. And you could also just write family search. Again, you can do it many different ways. There's no right or wrong way exactly. Just be consistent. So if I were to go to Ancestry next, I would put ancestry.com as the name probably, and not, since I put familysearch.org here, I just want to be consistent. Now the type here, and we have a various selection of types. We can use website for this since it's a website. And what I also like to do here is, so if there were an actual physical location of this repository, I'd stick an address in here. But since there's an internet tab here, what I like to do is also include information about this website. So I can say web home is the type, and my address is www.familysearch.org. You can add a description if you want. I don't need one. And that'll just point anyone there in case they don't know what familysearch.org is. And again, you can add notes if you'd like. I'm not going to for now. This is good. So when we say OK, it's going to save. And now we have our first repository created. And you see it lists the URL, and it's a website. All right. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to figure out what this source is. Okay, so this is a record within a source, but we need to find out what the source is so that we can put it in our sources view. So our source here is actually going to be the collection that this record comes from. So you can see right here, record collection, and we've got Pennsylvania births and christenings, 1709 to 1950. So we're just going to actually copy this text, and we're going to paste it right into Gramps. So we're going to, again, we're in the source view. We will click on New Source. The title of this source is exactly what Family Search told us, Pennsylvania births and christenings. Okay, now the author. This is more for like a book. You could put the author as Family Search because they did compile this for their website, but I'm actually going to leave this blank. I don't really tend to use this unless I'm using a book or something where there actually is a definite author. Instead, to include Family Search, I'll put it in the publication information. So familysearch.org. And if you want to include an abbreviation, you can. I usually don't. All right, so this source, again, we found at familysearch.org. So the last step that we need to take here is if we go to repositories, we can include this source inside of a repository. So we click here to add an existing repository. Now, if we wanted to create one, had we not done what we did before, we could click the plus, and we would get a brand new repository window. But we've already actually created one. So I'll cancel there, and we're going to just select the familysearch.org. Okay, now we get this window here. And what this window is, as you can see up here, it says Repository Reference Editor. So anytime we see Reference Editor in a window that pops up, this means that we are allowed here to include special information just for this relationship. So just between this source, the birth and christening record collection, and familysearch.org, this information in this very top box here will only appear for that connection there, that relationship. So what this is asking is, inside of this repository, what is the type of media here? And of course, it's electronic. And we could use film as well, because it is a microfilm. It's just, again, be consistent and do the same thing for each one. So I'm just going to put electronic. That's okay. That's good enough for me. And I don't really have a call number. The call number is basically probably going to be used more in like an actual library where you have, a call number for a book so that you can find it again or something like that. But we don't really need that in this case. Now, if we want to include any notes as far as specific notes just for this source in the repository, we can, but I'm not going to for now. Now, the information down here, this is shared information, as you can see, and this is shared information about the repository that we created before. So anything we change in here will update for not only the repository itself, but also for any other source that we've attached to that repository. So make sure that you understand that when you change this, it changes it for every place that the repository is listed. Okay, so as you can see here, this is what we typed earlier, familysearch.org. We said it was a website, and we've got an internet address here. So if we change this here, it's going to actually change our repository as well. So you probably won't want to mess with this bottom group here as much as you might the top when you attach a repository to a source. So I'm going to say OK, and what that does is it creates that link between the repository and the source. Now our source is actually not yet created. Not until we press OK here. We haven't saved. So it's kind of floating here, and it's ready, but we haven't yet saved it. We've got to click OK here. Now, this is all fine. It's great. We've got the title, publication, and we've attached it to a repository. So I can say OK now. And now you can see in the source view, we have our first source listed. Okay, now what we want to do for this next step is we actually need to point where inside of this source is the information that we are interested in, because this may be thousands of different records. So under Citations, now we really won't use this page as much. I'll show it to you here just because I'm being consistent, but really what you would probably do in the future is either A, you'd create your citation directly on the fact that you've entered, if you've already entered a source, but you could also go to sources and we'll change our view. So right now it's going to be showing just all sources listed, and in Citations, all the citations will be listed. But like we did the people view, where we grouped the families by surname, we can also group our citations by source, which I really like a lot better than the way that you can view it. So right now I have no citations, so that's why my source just disappeared. So we need to go ahead and create a citation first. So if we go to the citation view, click the plus. Okay, now you can see this window looks a little bit different than the last one. This one's asking for a source that's already been created. So we can either create a new source right here if we haven't already entered, but I'm going to click this right here because we've already created this source, the Pennsylvania births and christenings. Okay, and this would just pull out the author information that we put in the source edit window, and since we didn't have one, it's not going to give us anything. Okay, now the date. So we need to go back to our original document, and the date that it is asking for is the date in which the record was created. So in this case, we probably will enter the most recent date that is listed. Okay, so it does list her birth, but this is a past event here. This is the current event right now. So this event was probably entered on this day, if not very close to it. But as far as we know, the only date we have listed is the 31st of December, 1835. So that is what we'll use, and we'll type it in just like that, 31st December, 1835. Now the volume or the pages. So this is just an individual record. I don't have a page number or anything like that for it. So what I will actually do is just include some identifying information in this field so that I can come back and find this record in the future. And the information that I usually include is, so if I'm on Family Search or something looking for this, I will be able to use the name. However, I can also use the microfilm number down here. And so this is something I'm more interested in, is the microfilm number. So I will actually type her name, and we want to make sure we spell it exactly the way that it's on this record, even if it's misspelled. So they did misspell it on here. They have an E, whereas I spell it with an I. However, it's spelled many different ways throughout history, so maybe at that time they were spelling it that way. And then I will also include her first name, and then I will include, we've already got the date, so we really don't need the date again, so I will just include the microfilm number now. And then we can also choose the confidence, so how confident are we of this source, and I would just leave that at normal, but you know, depending on what it is and where it came from, you can decide how reliable something is. Okay, so that's really all there is as far as our citation, and that's all we really need. So let's go then. We want to attach our citation to the source. Well, we've already done that up here. So unlike where we did it down here at the repository, in this place, we do it up here at the source. So we don't have to actually do that. Now, there's one more step that I like to take when we're doing a citation, and that is that down here we actually have a full citation of this record, and I like to copy that and paste it somewhere just in case I'm ever interested in this record again. I don't have to create the citation myself. So what I like to do here is I'll create a note for each of my citations, and I will click on this plus here, and I'm just going to paste that citation straight into Gramps. And I'll say OK, and that's created a new note. And one thing to keep in mind is make sure that down here at type, if this is changed, if you've created some new ones or used other ones, it might not say citation. Just click on the drop down and find citation, and that way we know that we have an accurate citation here. And the other cool thing about this is that Gramps does offer links to their information. And so what's really neat is that we can actually click on this and it would bring a web browser up and bring us straight to the page that we pulled it off of originally. So that is very, very handy and allows me to get to things very quickly. So I do like to include that. So we hit OK, and now our citation is created here. And honestly, this view is not that helpful because it's kind of listing things by volume page. So if you just use page numbers, all your citations are just going to say page 1, page 5, page 10, page 30, and you really have no idea what the citation is for. So that's why I like to actually view my citations under the sources. So now that we have a citation, we can see the sources listed now. And again, I'm in the citation tree view versus just the sources view. So then when we click this little triangle, when it's pointing down, it's listing all of our citations inside of that source. So if I had other people that I were interested in this collection, all of those citations will be listed under one source, which I think is pretty helpful. So then if we are ever interested in seeing any of these things, we can just double click on them and it will bring up our whatever it is we clicked on. So here I clicked on the citation, so I'm getting the volume number, page number, all that kind of stuff. If I'm interested in updating my source, I can just click here on the source and get that information. The repositories, you can edit it just by going to the repository view and double clicking on the one you're interested in. Now, one thing that is nice about Gramps is that once we attach a citation to a source or a source to a repository, we can look at the References tab once we pull this up. And it's actually going to give us a list of every single source that we've found within that repository. So once I get my citations built up in my database, I can see every single source that came from Family Search. And likewise, in my sources, when I go to References, I can see every single citation that is pointing to that source. And I can actually go a step further, but not quite yet. On my citations, when I go to References, I'll be able to see in my tree every event or person or every little fact or piece of data that I've pulled from this record that I am pointing to with this citation. So everything is very linked together, very cleanly and consistently. And as long as you are consistent in attaching your source and your citations to the data that you're putting in your tree, everything is going to be very easy to access and to find where you got your information in the future. And that's what makes Gramps and this type of program and database so handy, because this would take forever to do, writing it out by hand to make all those connections between the data and all of the claims that you're going to make in the future. So this is the end of this video. We've learned not only why to cite, some general principles about our citations that we should kind of keep in mind as we move forward, as well as looking at a sample record and how to create the citation in Gramps. Now in the next video, we're going to take this further. So we're actually going to look at the information in this record, and we're going to begin to enter it into our tree. And then we'll be able to attach this record and its citation directly to the facts we put in. So that's why we did it in this order. We're doing the citation first so that any facts that we enter in the future we'll be able to link right away instead of later and then eventually forget about it and not do it at all. So if you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe so that we know who's watching. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for future videos, please let us know down below in the comments. And thank you so much for watching.